This story is based on the real-life disappearance of the Beaumont children. The Last Summer Day. Part 1, Australia Day morning. The scorching sun had barely crested the horizon when the children asked their mother if they could visit Glenelg Beach again on that fateful January 26, 1966. Nancy Beaumont stood in the doorway of their modest Somerton Park home, wiping her hands on her apron as she watched her 3 children bouncing with anticipation. The heat was already unbearable at 8 in the morning, the kind of oppressive Australian summer heat that made the air shimmer like water over hot asphalt. Jane, 9 years old, with her responsible demeanor and careful way of watching over her siblings, had already laid out their beach clothes and counted the coins for the bus fare twice. Her younger sister Arna, 7, danced impatiently from foot to foot, her dark hair catching the morning light as she chattered excitedly about building sandcastles and collecting shells. 4-year-old Grant, the baby of the family, clutched his favorite toy and looked up at his mother with those wide, trusting eyes that seemed to hold all the innocence in the world. The previous day had been equally sweltering, and Jim Beaumont had taken his children to the same beach before departing for his 3-day sales trip to Snowtown. It had become their routine during this particularly brutal heat wave that was gripping South Australia. South Australia was experiencing a heat wave, and the day prior, before heading to Snowtown for a 3-day sales trip, the children's father, Jim, had dropped them at the same beach. The children had returned home safely, sun-kissed and sandy, full of stories about their adventures by the water. Nancy felt the familiar tug of maternal worry as she looked at her 3 precious ones. In 1966, it was perfectly normal for children to travel independently to local destinations. The world seemed safer then. Neighborhoods were communities where everyone knew everyone else's business, and children were expected to be responsible and self-reliant. Jane was mature for her 9 years, already taking on the role of little mother to her siblings when needed. She could be trusted to watch over Arna and Grant. The morning routine unfolded with practiced efficiency. Nancy prepared their lunch simple sandwiches and cordial in a thermos, enough to sustain them through their beach adventure. She counted out the bus fare, adding a little extra for ice cream, and pressed the coins into Jane's careful hands. The girl's fingers closed around the money, with the solemnity of someone entrusted with an important mission. As it was too hot to walk, they took a 5-minute, 3-kilometer, 9 miles bus journey from their home to the beach. They caught the bus at 8:45 a.m., their excited chatter filling the morning air as they made their way to the bus stop. Nancy watched from the front window as they walked down the street, Jane in the middle holding Grant's small hand, Arna skipping alongside them. They looked so small against the backdrop of the suburban morning, 3 figures disappearing around the corner toward their ordinary, extraordinary day. The bus arrived punctually, as Adelaide buses did in those days. The driver, who recognized the children from their previous trips, smiled and accepted their fare. They found seats together, Jane making sure Grant was settled by the window where he could watch the passing scenery. The short journey to Glenelg took them through familiar neighborhoods, past houses where other families were just beginning their Australia Day celebrations. Glenelg Beach stretched before them like a golden promise when they alighted from the bus. The sand was already warm beneath their feet, and the Indian Ocean sparkled with an intensity that made them squint. Other families had already claimed their spots along the shoreline, umbrellas blooming like colorful flowers against the pale sand. Children's laughter mixed with the sound of waves, creating the perfect soundtrack for a summer day. Jane took charge immediately, as she always did. She found them a good spot not too far from the water, but close enough to the changing sheds that they could keep their belongings safe. The morning stretched ahead of them, full of possibilities. They would swim, build sandcastles, perhaps explore the pier, maybe buy ice cream with the extra coins their mother had given them. None of them could have imagined that this would be their last morning of innocence, their final hours of being just 3 children enjoying a summer day at the beach. The sun climbed higher in the sky, and the beach filled with more families celebrating the national holiday. Somewhere in that growing crowd, watching and waiting, was someone whose presence would change everything. Part 2, the golden hours. The morning melted into afternoon with the lazy quality that only summer days possess. Jane, Arna, and Grant had established their little territory on the sand, their towels spread in a neat pattern that spoke of Jane's methodical nature. The older girl kept careful watch over her siblings as they ran back and forth between their spot and the water's edge. Their laughter carried on the salt-tinged breeze. By midday, the beach had transformed into a bustling carnival of Australia Day celebration. Families had claimed every available patch of sand, their colorful umbrellas and beach blankets creating a patchwork quilt across the shoreline. The sound of transistor radios mixed with children's shrieks of delight as they discovered hermit crabs in the rock pools or chased waves that seemed to play tag with their bare feet. Grant, despite his 4 years, was fearless in the shallow water, though Jane never let him venture beyond her reach. Arna had appointed herself the family's chief shell collector, running up to her siblings every few minutes with treasures clutched in her sandy fists, a piece of sea glass worn smooth by countless tides, a perfect spiral shell that whispered ocean secrets when held to the ear. Around noon, several witnesses would later recall seeing the 3 children playing together near the changing sheds. They appeared to be having an animated conversation with someone, though in the bustling holiday crowd, individual interactions blended into the general hum of beach activity. Later, these fragments of memory would become crucial pieces in an impossible puzzle. A young woman who had been reading under a beach umbrella remembered noticing Jane because the girl seemed so responsible, so careful with her younger siblings. She watched as Jane helped Grant change into dry clothes after a particularly enthusiastic encounter with an incoming wave, marveling at how naturally the 9-year-old took charge. There was something endearing about the little family unit, the way they looked out for each other. As the afternoon wore on, the heat became even more intense. The sand burned bare feet, and the sun seemed to press down from directly overhead with the weight of a physical presence. Many families began seeking shade or preparing to leave, but the Beaumont children appeared to be settling in for a longer stay. They had been told to return home by 2 p.m., but children's time moves differently during summer holidays, and the beach held too many attractions to abandon easily. Witnesses would later piece together fragments of that afternoon, creating a jigsaw puzzle with too many missing pieces. A shop owner near the beach remembered seeing 3 children who matched their description buying ice cream and small toys, spending more money than they should have had. The children seemed relaxed, happy, chattering excitedly about something as they made their purchases. Another witness, an elderly man who had been fishing from the jetty, recalled seeing 3 children walking with a tall man toward the changing area. The man appeared to know them well. They were comfortable in his presence, not showing any signs of distress or reluctance. In fact, they seemed to be enjoying his company, as if he were a family friend or relative. The changing sheds at Glenelg Beach were a maze of individual stalls where beachgoers could change clothes and rinse off salt water. On a busy day like Australia Day, they were constantly occupied, providing privacy and shelter from the burning sun. Several people remembered hearing children's voices from that area. But with so many families present, it was impossible to identify specific conversations or determine if anything unusual was occurring. As 2 p.m. approached and then passed, the children made no move to leave. This was unusual for Jane, who was typically punctual and responsible about following their mother's instructions. Nancy had specifically told them to catch the afternoon bus home, emphasizing the importance of not being late. For Jane to ignore this instruction was completely out of character. The beach was beginning to thin out as families packed up their belongings and headed home for afternoon naps or family gatherings. The Beaumont children's towels remained spread on the sand, but the children themselves had moved away from their original spot. Various witnesses placed them in different locations throughout the afternoon near the kiosk, by the changing sheds, walking along the water's edge. One particularly haunting account came from a woman who was packing up her family's beach gear around 3 p.m. She remembered seeing 3 children who looked like the Beaumonts walking away from the beach area with a man. The children appeared to be following him willingly, even eagerly. The eldest girl was holding the hand of the youngest child, while the middle child skipped alongside them. They looked like any ordinary family group leaving the beach, except that the man was a stranger to the witness. The last confirmed sighting of the 3 children occurred sometime between 3 and 4 p.m., when they were seen in the company of an unknown adult male. The witness descriptions varied. Some said he was tall and thin. Others remembered him as being of medium build. His age was estimated anywhere from 35 to 50 years old. What remained consistent in all accounts was that the children appeared comfortable with him, suggesting they either knew him or he had successfully gained their trust. As the afternoon shadows began to lengthen, the beach gradually emptied of families. The Beaumont children's towels and belongings remained on the sand like abandoned stage props, waiting for actors who would never return to claim them. The golden hours of their last day were slipping away, carrying with them 3 young lives that would become the subject of one of Australia's most enduring mysteries. Part 3. When the sun set on innocence. Nancy Beaumont glanced at the kitchen clock for the 100th time that afternoon, its steady tick seeming to grow louder with each passing minute. 4:30 p.m. The children were supposed to have been home by mid-afternoon, certainly no later than 3 o'clock. But the house remained silent, except for the whisper of hot wind through the windows. and the distant sound of neighbors celebrating Australia Day. She tried to rationalize their absence, as any mother would. Perhaps they had lost track of time, mesmerized by the ocean's endless entertainment. Maybe they had met friends at the beach and were reluctant to leave the fun behind. Jane was responsible, but she was still only 9 years old, and the magnetic pull of a perfect beach day could make even the most conscientious child forget about time and obligations. By 5 o'clock, Nancy's casual concern had crystallized into genuine worry. She put on her hat and walked to the bus stop, watching each arriving bus with desperate hope. Other families were returning from their Australia Day outings, parents looking tired and satisfied, children sandy and sun-drowsy, but no sign of Jane, Arna, and Grant. The bus drivers were helpful and sympathetic. Yes, they remembered the 3 children from the morning trip to Glenelg. Such well-behaved children, especially the older girl who had made sure her siblings were safely seated. But no, they hadn't seen them board any return buses. The drivers knew the regular passengers on their routes, and the Beaumont children would have been easily recognizable. As evening approached, Nancy's worry transformed into panic. She contacted the police, though in 1966, there was a standard waiting period before children could be officially reported missing. The assumption was that they had simply wandered off or lost track of time, that they would turn up tired and apologetic after an extended adventure. But Nancy knew her children. Jane would never deliberately disobey instructions or cause her mother such worry. Something was terribly wrong. The initial police response was routine and somewhat dismissive. Children often wandered off, especially during school holidays. They would likely turn up soon, hungry, and full of stories about their extended beach adventure. The officers took basic information and assured Nancy that the children would probably be home before bedtime. As darkness fell over Adelaide, the casual optimism of the early evening began to evaporate. Jim Beaumont was contacted in Snowtown and immediately began the long drive home, his mind racing with possibilities, none of which he could bear to fully contemplate. Neighbors joined the growing search, walking through the streets calling the children's names, checking parks and playgrounds, knocking on doors to ask if anyone had seen 3 children walking home from the beach. The search intensified as the hours crawled by. Police officers who had initially viewed this as a routine case of children staying out past their curfew began to understand that this was something far more serious. Despite a widespread police investigation, the case remains unsolved. The beach was scoured by flashlight, every changing shed checked and rechecked, every possible hiding place investigated. Local radio stations began broadcasting appeals for information. The description of the 3 children was repeated hourly. Jane, 9 years old, dark-haired and responsible. Arna, 7, with a bright smile and boundless energy. Grant, 4 years old, with the trusting nature of the very young. Anyone who had seen them was urged to contact police immediately. As dawn broke on January 27, 1966, the truth could no longer be avoided or softened with optimism. The Beaumont children had not simply lost track of time or forgotten to catch the bus home. They had vanished completely, leaving behind only their beach towels and the mystery of their final hours. The massive search operation that followed would become one of the largest in Australian history. Hundreds of volunteers joined police officers, state emergency service workers, and military personnel in combing every inch of Glenelg Beach and the surrounding areas. Aircraft flew overhead in grid patterns. Search dogs followed scent trails that led nowhere, and divers explored the waters offshore. Media attention exploded across the nation and eventually around the world. The story of 3 children who had simply vanished from a crowded beach on Australia Day captured public imagination and horror in equal measure. Theories proliferated. Accidental drowning, abduction, voluntary departure with someone they trusted. None could be proven. All remained terrifyingly possible. The investigation revealed disturbing details about that final afternoon. Some witnesses came forward regarding a suspicious man seen luring the kids away. He was never identified. The man described by multiple witnesses remained a phantom figure, tall, middle-aged, someone who had gained the children's trust quickly and completely. The ease with which the children had apparently accompanied him suggested either prior acquaintance or a masterful manipulation of their natural childhood trust. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months, and still no trace of Jane, Arna, and Grant Beaumont. Despite a huge search effort, no sign of the children has been found in over 50 years. An $1 million reward is still being offered for information related to the cold case by the South Australian government. The disappearance fundamentally changed Australian society. When Jane, 9, Arna, 7, and Grant, 4, disappeared without a trace on Jan 26, 1966, it changed the whole tenor of a nation. Parents who didn't think twice about letting their kids go out to play unsupervised suddenly found themselves unable to let their children out of sight. The implicit trust that had allowed children to roam freely through neighborhoods and take independent trips to local attractions evaporated overnight. The Beaumont children became more than just 3 missing individuals. They became symbols of lost innocence, representatives of a more trusting time that could never be recovered. Their smiling faces, captured in family photographs taken just days before their disappearance, would become among the most recognizable images in Australian criminal history. This year marks the 59th anniversary of their disappearance, and still the questions remain unanswered. What happened during those final hours at Glenelg Beach? Who was the mysterious man who apparently gained their trust so completely? Where are Jane, Arna, and Grant Beaumont? The setting sun on January 26, 1966, marked the end of more than just a summer day. It marked the end of an era of childhood freedom, parental trust, and national innocence that Australia would never recover. 3 children had walked into a bright Australia Day morning and vanished into legend, leaving behind a mystery that continues to haunt the nation nearly 6 decades later. Their story serves as a reminder that evil can intrude into the most ordinary moments, that safety is never guaranteed, and that some questions may never find their answers. The Beaumont children remain forever frozen in time, Jane with her sense of responsibility, Arna with her bright curiosity, and Grant with his trusting smile 3 lives that touched an entire nation and changed it forever.